You're listening to the Generation to Generation podcast, episode 5. Joining me on the podcast today is author and therapist Dr. Les Carter. I first came across Les's work through his YouTube channel that he co-hosts with fellow author Laura Sharanza called Surviving Narcissism. Our conversation today looks at the impact of narcissism in the church, the characteristics of narcissistic leadership, and our responsibility as leaders in light of the growing epidemic and the path to healing for those who've experienced narcissistic abuse. Les offers great advice on ministry that I think will be a source of insight as well as an encouragement. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. Joining me on the podcast today is author and therapist Dr. Les Carter. Les has been a psychotherapist in private practice since 1980, specializing in anxiety, depression, anger management, and narcissistic personality disorder. In addition to counseling and teaching, he has authored several books, including The Anger Trap, Enough About You, Let's Talk About Me, and most recently the book When Pleasing You is Killing Me. In addition to writing over 20 books, Les is also the founder of Marriage Path, a comprehensive and effective approach to marital restoration and growth. Les, I've been looking forward to our conversation today and really excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Michael. I'm pleased to be here with you.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe a good place for us to start would be if you could share a little bit about your current practice and what led you into the field of psychotherapy.
Well, I could go a long way on that one. I'm in Southlake, Texas, which is it's a suburb of Dallas. I actually live in Dallas. And I've been doing this, like you said, since 1980. So that's you add it up. That means I'm old. Actually, I grew up in the home of a prison chaplain, and my father actually started in the ministry, and then he in the military as a chaplain. Then he went into Leavenworth prison. The joke is Dad was in and out of prison my entire childhood, which is true. The operative word is out. He came home every day. Yeah. And then he wound up being a consultant to chaplains throughout most of my childhood and into my college years. So I was actually exposed to quite an unusual assortment of people growing up, because he would involve me with his consulting and all, and I'd go out there with him in the field and all and meet people and all of that. And I've always had a curiosity about human nature, what makes people tick, and why does this person have the problem they do, and why do I not? And it's just been a natural thing for me to get into. So when I decided on a field of study, psychology, it was a real easy choice. And I wound up, when I finished graduate, I went to Baylor and then the University of North Texas for my master's and doctorate. And then when I finished there, I went straight with Frank Minirth and Paul Meyer with the Minirth-Meyer Clinic, and stayed with them for 25 years. And that was just an absolute wonderful experience. Dr. Minirth is not with us anymore, and I just loved him. And then almost 15 years ago, 14 and a half years ago, I set up my own little place over here in Southlake. And we have a nice clinic, and the intro you gave, I do a lot of mood disorders, and it bleeds into marital work, et cetera. So it's been a real full career for me, and now I'm doing all this on YouTube along with my writing and all, and it's a blessing. I'm honored when people invite me into their personal lives and say, "Would you be willing to talk with me about it?" And the answer is always yes.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the things, Les, I've just greatly been blessed by your ministry and your work just over the past few years. And you're currently doing work through your writings and YouTube channel on the issue of narcissism. And in one of your writings entitled Life with a Narcissist, you wrote, being honest, we each could recognize some measure of narcissism in ourselves. And when we refer, though, to narcissistic personality, we mean that the individual is so self-absorbed that is a defining feature of his or her personality. So I was just wondering in our conversation today, and was hoping we could talk about, what it's like to be in a relationship with someone with narcissistic tendencies. You and I have talked about, you mentioned just how Genesis 3 really informs your understanding of this issue of narcissism. So maybe to begin with, you could share what it means when we speak about narcissism.
Well, first you have the old Greek mythological tale about the person Narcissus who's wandering through the forest, and he stops at a pond and looks into the pond to refresh himself and becomes enamored with what he sees. and he's so enamored with his own reflection that he is unable to pull himself away. So that's kind of that's of course where we get the term narcissism, and that's kind of a folklore kind of thing that says, people like Narcissus can be so enamored with themselves. But then the more ancient story beyond that is the story of the Garden of Eden. It's so full of metaphor, and when you look at it, there's just it's a good instruction on the psychological nature and character of humanity. When Adam and Eve decided to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the temptation was, so you can be like God. In other words, they had this prideful mentality that says, hey, you know what? It's really pretty cool for me to be me. And in fact, so much so that we need to build a world around my understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And so, like Narcissus, but even more so, that story implies that their favorite words would be, I know. That's knowledge of good and evil. I know how things ought to be. And so they go into this high control mode, and there's this notion that says whatever my cravings, my preferences, my desires, that's what matters most. And then the story continues. They're off into the bushes after they've kind of made that fateful decision, hiding and blaming one another. And it says, I was afraid. And so a second thing that happens when you become enamored with yourself and try to have control is you go into cover-up mode. When I talk about narcissism, I talk about how it's actually a portrayal of your false self. You learn not to be honest about who you are. You learn to blame and to shift and to put the focus elsewhere so that you can have the proper kind of mask. And then a third thing that happened with Adam and Eve was then it implies they wind up being estranged from one another. They're estranged from God. So the emotion that goes with that is loneliness. There's a disconnect that they can have with individuals. And then beyond that, God says, well, okay, here are the consequences then for the choices you've made. You used to be at this higher order of living. Now you're going to be at a lower order of living. And so the emotion that's associated with that is inferiority with shame and guilt and inadequacy and questioning your own personal value. And then finally, in that same story, they have a family and anger shows up. One brother kills another. And so in the story of the Garden of Eden, you have 5 primary emotions that are depicted as being part of humanity: pride, fear, loneliness, inferiority, and anger. And it all starts with that pride, that self-absorption, and that's where I'm coming from. Now, in theological terms, we refer to that as the sin nature. In psychological terms, we just call it narcissism. And so if you can see that that's a story of all humanity, then you realize, well, then narcissism is something that I have, that I can breathe into very easily. When you have little children growing up, you don't have to give them lessons on self-absorption. They can act that way naturally because it's just in them. Healthy people see that, they acknowledge it, they own it, and then they ask the question, what would my better alternative be? And so when that happens, we call that the maturation process. Unhealthy people, if they see it, they think, well, let me explain to you why I need to be in control. And so they don't grow. They don't have insight, and they just keep going back to that self-absorption as if that's the way to go. And so narcissism can be understood as a pattern on a spectrum. Some people are way, way down near the 100% level. Others may be at a 75% level. They see some of it, but not enough. And others are at a 45% level. I think those of us who try to be healthy are down around the 20% level because none of us get rid of it entirely. And so the challenge that each of us has is to be honest about what we bring with us on the inside, and then to ask what that better alternative would be. And, of course, the whole Christian ethic, when it's managed properly, can speak into that in a very clean and healthy and uplifting kind of way.
And that's really helpful, Les. I mean, I think that's one of the things that stood out just as I've read your books and just your YouTube channel with, I guess, Laura Sharanza, I guess, Surviving Narcissism, which is just such a helpful channel. Just that issue of the false self. And, kind of to that, one of the areas that I've seen really grow over the years, just as a pastor and a counselor, is just this epidemic of narcissism in the church, and I would say including just church leadership. Narcissism in so many ways is defined by unhealthy worship and commitment to self, as you were saying, just with an absence of empathy for those you're in relationship with. So I was just wondering, with your almost 40 years of clinical practice and experience, as you've listened to countless stories, how you would describe the impact of narcissism just on the local church.
Well, okay, I've learned that when I start talking, at least with my beliefs about what you're asking, that I can get myself into a lot of trouble. But I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. One of the emphases that people can make when they read the Bible, and then when they think in terms of being in church leadership, they emphasize authority. By the authority of God, by the authority of Scripture, here's what you're supposed to do. And when I come along and say, well, what if we don't emphasize authority? Then it makes me sound like, I'm anti-truth and I'm anti, goodness and all of that. And instead, let's emphasize love and kindness and servitude and helpfulness and humility. And through that, then our leadership grows. And basically, to me, that's what Jesus was attempting to explain to the Pharisees. It's like, okay, guys, y'all are so into being right, which isn't that what the whole Garden of Eden story was about that I just mentioned? You're so into being right and then superimposing your correctness on others and then blaming and shifting and all. What happened to the whole notion of love? Well, in our modern church, we have a lot of hierarchy. And just to put it in a much larger perspective, it's so interesting. Was it Charlemagne that was the emperor back in Rome that declared Christianity to be the religion of the Roman Empire? And so the Roman Empire had this philosophy called lex rex, law rules. And the law is ultimate. And so Christianity joined in with the Lex Rex philosophy, and Christianity became a very hierarchical system. And it's like, I kind of think that's what Jesus was telling us to not do. And so even now we still have a lot of this Lex Rex, law rules. And so we venerate the leaders of our church. We make them to be megastars, and they're the go-to person that has to have all the correct answers. And we have committees that are supposed to come up with all of the rules and structure and how we're supposed to do things. And it's not as though I'm against structure, because if you knew me, you know I'm a very structured person as a general rule. But somewhere in the midst of emphasizing all of this authority and correctness and propriety, it's so easy to forget kindness and tenderness and love. And, sometimes these authority-based people will say, well, the most loving thing I can do is tell them what to do. And it does, although they forget that it just doesn't come across very loving when they do it, but they rationalize it. And so that's a problem we have to watch out for, going so deep into the authoritarian style that it trumps love.
I think that's one of the things I so appreciate just about the ministry of Jesus Christ. Just in the Gospels, you see just his empathy, his humility, and in that, just his ability to see people, to see the people that were right in front of him, to see the person as bearing God's image, and just the weight of glory that person had, and really delighting in their glory. So kind of with that, in your experience, how would you describe the importance of empathy in leadership, and just with that empathy, the ability to see the person who's right in front of you?
Well, let me kind of share a personal thing. In the churches that I've been involved in through the years, I've always taught, and I'm at a church now in Dallas where in my class we have a rotating teacher system, and I'm in that. And a number of years ago, I became convicted that it's one thing to go to church on Sunday and talk about what it means to be a Christian, but we need to have regular elements in our lifestyle that just means we're being Christian. Now, one is a noun, the other is an adjective. And so years ago, there was a group of us at our church that we go down to a women's shelter where women are, they go to this place that's a non-disclosed place to the public, and we cook them breakfast. Every second Saturday of the month, that's what I'm doing, cooking breakfast for these people and their kids. And I've been doing it now for years, and I do it for them, but I also do it just for me. I need to be that guy. I need to get down on the floor and clean up things when a kid spills something, and just show words of kindness. And I want to make sure that my Christianity is built on servitude and helpfulness, and Jesus put an enormous emphasis on the outlier, the least of these my brethren, that kind of teaching. When Jesus was trying to explain to his disciples what it meant to be a representative of God, he would say, hey, watch this. And there would be this group of lepers over there. And everybody would say, Jesus, you're not supposed to go over there because they're unclean. And it's like, no, they need me. And he would go engage with them. And it wasn't just a 2-minute interaction. I'm sure he would talk with them and shoot the breeze and ask them about their backgrounds and all. He would touch them, and image. You're not supposed to do that. And it's like, I want to draw God's image out of you. It's in there. And that's being Christ-like, and that's what I mean when I say if we're going to be leaders and if we're going to have an impact, speaking, good teaching and all like that, I'm for that. But you really show where you are when you get your hands dirty. And when you're out there and you touch them and you're with them, and it's just a routine part of what you are, and it's not some big convoluted program. You just go and do it and be it. And I think that sometimes leaders can get so caught up in their own self-importance or celebrity status, or I'm the one that spearheads all of this, but I don't have time for that. Then that's when they begin losing what it's all about, which is it's life down in the trenches with those who appreciate you being in the trenches with them.
The more I look at the life of Jesus and just how he related to people, the more it stands out, just the role that empathy played in his relationships. I was just wondering, as you've worked with clients over the years who are in relationship with a narcissist, just the significance of just kind of helping them understand the importance of empathy in those relationships.
Empathy is the ultimate anti-narcissist ingredient. When I was a kid, and I mentioned that my dad was a chaplain, he actually would go on trips, and let's say he would go to a boys' detention center and talk to the chaplains there, or a facility for those who were mentally challenged, and he'd talk to the chaplains there, and I would be involved in the tours and stuff like that. Multiple times he would pull me aside, let's say as a 12 or 13-year-old kid, and say, I want you to understand that if you had the exact same environmental influences as these people had, if you had the exact same biology and family system and social structure around you, you could actually be in the very same spot as these people are. They are us, and we want to engage with them, not in a us versus them, but in a we kind of mentality. And I always liked it when an adult talked to me that way. It's just as a kid I was kind of pensive in that kind of fashion, and that's what empathizers do. It's like, before I get angry at you, I want to slow down and think, what's it like having grown up in your set of circumstances? If it's a husband and wife, and you're ticked off at each other, well, wait a minute. I know there's a backstory there. What's your backstory? And tell me about that, and let me understand what it is that's so important that you're trying to tell me. So many people have difficulty thinking that way, but that's empathy. And empathy implies that you have a certain amount of self-restraint, and you have a missionality about who you are and how you're wanting to engage with other individuals. But so many people have what I would just call a reactor mentality, where they just kind of pop off and react to whatever happens to be right there in front of them, that they're not taking that broader initiative. Wait a minute, I'm on mission. I have a purpose. Here's what my purpose is, and it's especially shown in moments of conflict or crisis or tension. That's when you know what's really on the inside of me, and they live into it, and they see those moments of conflict as an opportunity to be a we person as opposed to a me person. And that's where empathy comes in, and it's so essential. And so I look at empathy not as putting together a string of good techniques about how to talk to people, but I look at it as a mindset that you carry with you that you just can't help but live into.
Yeah. And I think even as you're sharing that, Les, just even the issue of the we versus me, I think it was a video you did called the religious narcissist, where you mentioned Dana Carvey's the church lady from SNL, and I'm an SNL fan, so I appreciated that reference.
Okay. Yeah, I've gotten ripped on that a couple of times.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I enjoyed it, Les.
Okay.
But I think kind of in that, just even that, what I appreciated about it is because I think it's connected to what you were just sharing, just that that positional difference, and that and just the gift that your father gave you, Les, and really affirming Imago Dei, that okay, this is someone who has real value and dignity, and is not below us, and we're not above them. And so I think even when I think of the local church, in so many ways can be our family 2.0, a place where we all bring our experiences, for better or for worse, from our family of origins, to be worked out in community. And it seems like one of the things that narcissistic leaders need really is to have loyal and unquestioning followers. How would you say the church, especially in today's kind of cult of personality, is especially susceptible to these types of leaders?
Well, in narcissistic parlance now, we refer to those people that surround them as the flying monkeys. Remember the Wizard of Oz and the Wicked Witch of the West had the flying monkeys that would do whatever she told them to do.
One of the scariest scenes in my entire life, Les. It's like I have PTSD from watching that scene as like a 5-year-old, So.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I may have been 5 or 6 years old, and it was on the TV, and I started crying.
I think I cried too. So you were not alone.
So that childhood trauma, but hopefully you learned something. I didn't even get to the flying monkey part because I was already in the dining room by then. Just like I'm not watching that stuff. Yeah. But we digress. But when you get into that power place, then it's so easy to think what I need is people who will tell me what I want to hear, and I need people that'll do exactly what I say they ought to do. And in doing so, you can actually get to the place of thinking, when somebody challenges my thinking and says, hey, there's something different for us to consider, then you go into this binary, all or nothing, black and white kind of thinking that's so common with the religious folk. In fact, if you were to talk to the secular people and ask, when you think of Christians, what do you think of? They'll usually say something like stubborn or judgmental or closed-minded, wanting to fit me into their mold, things like that. And so what we want to do instead is to say, if I'm going to be a leader, there are a whole lot of ways of thinking out there that other people are bringing to my organization. And rather than saying, come be as I am, I can go and ask, well, who are you? And it's not like I'm going to conform to them because they may have a lot of crummy stuff going on, but I want to know you. And I want to know where you're coming from. And we'll get to the better alternative. But first, before we get there, you need to feel like I care about you, and I want to know from your perspective why you do the things you do, and you show patience, and you don't immediately try to fit people into the mold, and you don't get people around you that'll say, yeah, that's exactly what we're all going to do, but you get to know them at their level of life, and again, I go back to Jesus. I don't think that whenever he engaged with people that immediately they all said, well, now that Jesus said this, we're just all going to do what he says. I'm sure there were people that's like, well, I need to watch him, and I need to kind of observe and see if he backs up what he does. And so Jesus had a lot of patience. It was so, well, just watch how I treat people, and notice that there's a love and a dignity that I stand for. And if you see over time that that's the real thing, then I'm hoping that you're going to then want to know much more fully how I think and what my mindset and my values are. But it starts with that. And then I know that he would attempt to infuse that kind of thinking into the minds of the disciples. And so that rather than they being flying monkeys that were, all about the rules and regulations, it's like, no, what we do is we infest the people around us with our goodness and our kindness and our curiosity and our availability. And out of that comes our leadership.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Even just like what characterizes, Christ-like love. Just even that emphasis on patience and tenderness, and it just really kind of leads into this next question I was wanting to ask you. I recently read where the Anglican Church, responding to, growing concerns about the kinds of clergy that were coming into the Church of England and what they were attracting, has decided to expand its assessment of clergy candidates to include, more rigorous psychological testing, including assessing for narcissism. And was just wondering kind of your thoughts, on this, and how, one of the things that I read was just the prevalence of bullying by these types of leaders. And so I would say, just ask, like, for the person who's maybe listening to our conversation, who thinks they're in just kind of in relationship with a narcissist, what would be some of those kind of characteristics of the narcissist who bullies, and what that might look like?
Well, keeping in mind that bully person is a control person, the need to be in control is by far and away the number one thing you watch for that tells how far a person has gone into an unhealthiness. And I refer back to Genesis 3. That was the first thing. You be in control. You play God. And there are times when somebody can become so drunk with their own knowledge and with their own self-importance that that's the most important thing. And so typically once you have that control mindset, it's very easy then to be contentious or angry or demanding or punishing. And then when somebody comes along and says, hey, I don't really care for that, they won't listen, but they defend, they justify, and then they make that other person the problem. And so you can see that these strongly narcissistic leader type individuals, they're into conformity. They're into fitting people into their grooves, and they will punish you if you don't go into the grooves with them. And so when you have a quote leader, I say quotes because who wants to follow that? Leadership is predicated on people saying, I want to follow this. But if you have a leader that goes in that direction, then that's not a good sign. I have another YouTube channel. I have the Surviving Narcissism, but I also have one that's just called the Dr. Les Carter channel. And in that one, I have a video entitled "One Question that Controllers Fail to Answer," or something like that. I can't remember the exact title. But the one question is, if I have to control you so that you'll conform to me, exactly what kind of relationship do we have? It's not satisfying to you, and it's not satisfying to me. But the bullying narcissist, it's like, I don't care about that. Just do what I tell you to do. And so it's a very closed way of thinking, and as a result, that person is trying to set up an autocracy where my word is final, not God, but me. And they'll dress it up and saying they're speaking for God, but if it's not anchored in love, then no, they're not. And so that's what we watch for.
Yeah, and I think that's, as you talk about that, I think, one of the challenges, in recognizing individuals with narcissism is that they can have the language of vulnerability, or even kind of couch their bullying just in kind of passive aggressive ways. I remember one author, Chuck DeGroat, referred to it in narcissists as kind of a faux neurability, like this kind of, parroting the language of the heart, or acting like they're vulnerable, but in reality, really just being committed to kind of protecting that false self. And so,
Oh, so
yeah.
true.
And I think in my experience personally and in pastoral ministry and counseling, they can have the language of the heart. They can talk about Myers-Briggs type and Enneagram numbers, but really lack a self-awareness that leads to empathy for others. So I just was wondering, where we're at, as far as the church, how would you advise a church hiring a pastor or picking an elder, whether that be a personnel committee, pastoral search team, as far as hiring someone and being aware of these issues in light of how destructive these individuals can be in community and in the context of the church?
Well, to me, one of the biggest indicators, and I go back to the whole notion of having that servant spirit. I want to know before a person takes on leadership the extent of their history of servitude. If they're the kind of person that always likes to rise to the position of telling folks what to do and being in charge, and that's really what seems to be most important. They can have a wonderful education and make all A's at the prestigious universities and seminary. Okay, well, that's good. I like to have smart people at the top. But what I also want to know, though, is what do you do down in the trenches? What's your history there? And when I find that somebody has taken some time out, whether it's, there's a young man and his wife that I'm just so impressed with as I watch them grow in the ministry. He took a year out and spent an entire year, kind of like the gap year that some of the Europeans do. And he stayed at a village in outside of South Africa and was a teacher. And came to know the people in a very real and genuine way, and it's engaging with them in their music, engaging with them in their agriculture, and all the other kind of things that he could do to help. Okay, when I know somebody has a deep history where it's like, no, I want to do that. I want to learn how to meet people at the place of need, or if they have a history of doing some of the projects on them in their hometown, and they've got a long history of being that person that says, I know there's a behind the scenes kind of thing here that's not all that glamorous, but I'm going to do that. That's the person I want at the front later on as they mature. And so, in fact, there's studies that talk about psychological wholeness, and the single thing that contributes to psychological wholeness is having a history of kindness and helpfulness to other individuals. You find contentment through that. And so we want leaders who not just understand that intellectually or theoretically, but they have a deep history already of living that out. When I know that that's just embedded in their character, it's like, I want to know more about what that person has to say. That's the one I look to as the exemplar.
And less kind of with that, I think just the challenge of kind of determining, is this someone who really sees it as a privilege to serve? A lot of times when we come to the issue of narcissism, it's easy to see it as this kind of like large overarching category. I was wondering, I think it would be helpful just for those in positions where they can make decisions on hiring leaders to kind of have a little bit of a sense of just the difference between covert and overt narcissism. And I've kind of wondered over the years if there's even, more of a prevalence of covert narcissism as far as leaders in the church, where, it's, there's a presentation of vulnerability or a presentation of being a servant, but things are more kind of almost like you mentioned Wizard of Oz, kind of behind the curtain. There's other things that are kind of going on. So, how could someone really differentiate between that overt and covert narcissism and really recognize, that covert aspect of it?
Well, that's huge, and frankly, you are correct in saying that the covert can be more difficult. The overt narcissists, they're so blatant with their control and all of that. The covert narcissists, they like to have control, but they're going to be less vulnerable with their motives and all. and actually, when we talk about covert narcissism, another term tends to run parallel with that, and that's the term passive aggressive. For example, a covert narcissist, when it comes down to it, they don't really make an effort to connect with people at a heart level. It's kind of like, well, I know you've got issues, but I don't know that I want to get involved. Or they may be overly sensitive if you say, may I offer a suggestion? And when you know that they just kind of get their feelings hurt, or they just kind of think, well, what do you have to say to me? That's its own form of narcissism. Like you don't know life like I know life, or maybe they can show a disinterest in somebody's deeper needs. I don't know that I need to get involved, or things like that. Or they can have a judgmental attitude, or they can be uncomfortable with people who disagree, and they don't respond with an open-mindedness. That's all part of the covert narcissism, because there's a hidden mindset of superiority that comes along with that. Or another element of covert narcissism, they don't like to say I was wrong or I blew it, because they have to keep that false image up. And so to say I was wrong means I'm just like every regular other person out there, and I can't be that. And so they can withdraw, or they can just kind of keep that mask on, and they can smile, but you're not really going to know them very deeply. And that's what the covert is all about.
And so would you say it's fair, just the need, if you're in a relationship with someone like that, just the need to minimize your expectations for this person?
You mean if you're engaging with somebody who has these strong narcissistic tendencies?
Just what you're expecting from them in relationship, the need to just kind of minimize the expectation that they would want to know you or allow themselves to be known.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the more you realize that a person has that strong narcissistic bent, they just kind of exude the notion that says, hey, look, there's not enough room in this relationship for the both of us. It's all about me. And it's like, oh, you know what? Okay, I get it. And if that's the way you operate, then it sounds like this is going to be a pretty lopsided way to go. And too many times people make the mistake of trying to plead their case and coerce and convince. But the narcissist always figures out a way to win, because they'll invalidate and all the rest. And so at some point when you know that you have somebody that has this real strong control need and low empathy, it's like you have a free will. You may be that if that's what you want to be. What I want to do is I want to, first of all, commit my life to something that's much more substantial, and then I want to be with people who understand life from that more well-informed mindset of goodness and kindness and respect. In fact, I have a little ditty that I use, Dr. C, that would be me, DRC, stands for dignity, respect, civility. And it's like I want to be somebody that lives that out, and then I want to bring people into my closest inner circle of people who understand dignity, respect, civility, and that's what we stand for here. And you're going to know it just by saying, "Watch this," and then you live it.
Well, Les, this has just been such a encouragement to me personally, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. So we're going to wrap up now. Just wanted to say thank you for your ministry and service to so many over the years. Appreciate your time today, and I'm sure it's going to be an encouragement to those who listen to the conversation. What would you say is the best way, just for our listeners, to get connected to some of your resources, your YouTube channels and books?
Well, the whole YouTube thing has been such a fun thing for me to do. I've been doing that for a year now. And so, just look up Surviving Narcissism, or just type in Dr. Les Carter. It'll all pop up. Right. And I've got well over 100 videos on there now, and they're 13, 14 minutes each, kind of a lot of teaching to it. And so that can be a good resource for you as an individual, but also it can be a jumping off place for small groups to discuss things and all of that. And then I've got books and online workshops and things like that you can put a Google in for that and you'll find it. I feel blessed that I had the chance to do the kind of work that I do. And then when I speak into it in a public way like this, it's just my way of saying that I think that there are some things that I've learned from the people who've been an influence in my life, and I learned from the patients that I work with. So would you like to know what it is? And that's where I'm speaking from. I'm just speaking from my own life experience, and I hope it helps somebody else along the way.
Well, our conversation today, Les, has just been a huge blessing to me personally, and I'm sure it'll be a blessing to those who listen as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
You're kind, Michael, and I really enjoy being with you here, and blessings to you and those who are listening here. I want this to be something that's thought-provoking and stimulating so that we can truly make a difference together.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you've been enjoying the podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you would leave a review on iTunes or Facebook. If you know someone who might enjoy or be encouraged by the show, feel free to share the podcast with them. Your willingness to share the show is one of the best ways to help it grow. As always, thanks for listening. Until next time.